Welcome to today's session. Today's session is really focused around the continuous improvement approach within TED. So something we've been working on quite recently is that repeat TED function. And at LTH, we have quite a number of teams that repeat this regularly. But we know for many of you, you'll have gone through those initial TEDs, maybe with your first teams, and you may be coming up to a stage where those teams are perhaps looking to revisit TED. So this session is going to look around why the continuous improvement cycle is important in TED and why TED isn't just a one-off intervention, and why we really wanted to make continuous improvement a core part of what people do when they think about TED. We're going to look into how to set up and learn from follow-up TEDs. So I've recently made a guide which we'll share with you with the recording from today's session. And we're going to look at the value from a team's perspective on how teams can benefit from revisiting the TED process and what learning opportunities there might be from both the team's perspective and for yourselves as OD and HR practitioners. Some of the things you might be looking for from the TED data that you get at an organisational level as well. So in terms of continuous improvement, firstly, it's important that we make it really clear when we talk to team leaders about this, that TED isn't a one-off intervention. The first time a team engages with TED, it can often be a really useful baseline measure for them. It can help to identify their main strengths, areas for improvement, and what their priorities might be. So the first TED is really valuable. However, it's not uncommon that sometimes team leaders and perhaps team members might be a little bit apprehensive when they're first engaging in the process, because they're stepping into the unknown. And a lot of that initial team leader training that we put on, a lot of the support that you're likely giving to your team leaders especially, but team members as well, is around building that confidence the first time that they do it. So with that support that you've likely already given in mind, you've probably noticed that sometimes it can be a challenge with a team's first TED to get 100% response rate. As much as we try and encourage that uptake, and particularly in larger teams, there will be team members who perhaps are a little bit skeptical about how it's going to be used, how the data is going to come out, what it means for them, how it's going to be different than other surveys. And the advice that I often give to team leaders is always try and keep your momentum with your TED cycle. As much as it can be useful sometimes to maybe delay your deadline by a few days or a week maybe, don't do that too much in your sort of pursuit of 100% response rate, because the danger is that will really turn off anyone who's perhaps answered it on day one and might be thinking, oh, they've forgotten about my feedback because it's been weeks or maybe over a month since I initially gave my feedback. So it's important to understand how, although it might be a little bit daunting from a team leader's perspective in opening themselves up to TED, and they may need that support the first time, our goal is always to get the team and the team leader to a stage where they're confident in regularly implementing this TED cycle. So repeating the TED process helps to grow that confidence. With that experience from your first time or any previous times, you can learn from that experience as a team leader, perhaps tweak your approach. You can maybe use some of that repeat TED conversation time to reflect on the toolkits that you used the first time or how you implemented your action plan, and use that to really refine and run TED the way that feels right for your team. So also having a clear and committed TED cycle can also help teams overcome conflict. So if you're perhaps in a team where there's perhaps more than one possible avenue of where you want to go following your TED results, there's more than one way that you might address maybe a communication challenge or a team culture challenge. By committing to an improvement cycle and having a plan for when you intend to revisit TED, this can help to allay some of that challenge. So you might say, right, we're going to go with plan A for the next few months, and we're going to commit to running TED again in 4 or 5 months' time, at which point we'll review how well has this worked. Is there anything that could have been done better, or were we better switching to plan B, which was one of the ideas that we chose the first time? So it helps to create that confidence that although you might not be able to proceed with all the ideas that come out of a TED feedback session, you've got a plan for reviewing and seeing if things have worked, reviewing what other options there might be, and really engaging in that iterative process to continuously improve. Here we've got the PDSA cycle, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and really this underpins any continuous improvement approach in a range of different settings. So clinicians, project managers, educators, and a range of professional disciplines that are engaging with TED will be familiar with this cycle in some format in their own context. So essentially, this sets out a framework for that iterative learning and reflection, which accounts for how they might try new things, how they might perhaps learn from failure or successes they've had together. It helps in a team setting, it helps them account for external changes and what might have changed since the previous time we engaged with TED. But it also helps the team reflect on internal changes and shifting priorities as well, as things change with that. So this fits in almost perfectly, really, with the TED approach. So when we first designed TED, we wanted it to be this continuous improvement approach, so that teams could identify manageable actions that compounded to make more significant changes to either team culture or shared working practices, how teams are working together, but also created this ability to be resilient to external factors. So what this sets out is the TED cycle sets out how teams might plan their work. It gives them an opportunity to do something to understand the current context or situation, and it gives them a framework to be able to study their findings. So it's about learning together, taking shared ownership of what's in your TED report in a safe way. So it's as if you're getting this external view that you can look at objectively as a team. And then it's about setting action to improve your shared working practices. So using that learning that you've come together to do and agreeing on what's the best way forward for us when we're working together. So when implemented well, this repeated regularity that a team engages with TED helps to embed that continuous learning, shared accountability, and helps to manage change. And as I mentioned, it helps teams become more resilient. I find that the more often teams have been through something like this, the more confident they feel in the face of future challenges. And definitely part of the research that I did last year for my external study was looking at teams' resilience following the pandemic. And pretty much across the board, teams that were engaging in these sorts of conversations felt more confident about future challenges or uncertainty that was on the horizon, because they were giving themselves that opportunity to reflect on challenges that they come through, but also understood that even when you don't have all the answers today, there will be set points in the future where we know we'll have opportunity to take stock, to understand what's going on around us, to share our different perspectives and set ourselves on the best possible course for us and our team. I wanted to share this with you. I think I have shared this with a couple of you who I've been on calls with recently, but there has been a recent CIPD study that's released findings based on a meta-analysis of different team engagement studies. So this is essentially a lot of the engagement studies that underpin TED and the annual staff survey. A lot of that research into engagement in a range of different contexts, really. So it's not just in healthcare systems, it was a worldwide study, so it looks at lots of different industries and types of organisations. But the findings of this study, and we'll share the link to this research with you, underpin the ethos that's behind TED. So by highlighting the importance of teams creating space for reflection and shared learning and development. Yeah. So some of the recommendations from this research indicate how team dynamics are vitally important as an indicator of success, both within an organisation and for teams themselves. So teams with poor interpersonal relationships or poor shared understanding will struggle to achieve high performance. Organising team knowledge helps teams create a shared understanding of the different perspectives in the group and what opportunities they're presented with as well. And then it also highlights how well-planned interventions provide opportunities for teams to develop and improve performance. And when we think of interventions, these could be external things, like when we might come in from an OD perspective. But what TED does is provide sort of off-the-shelf interventions that teams can choose in terms of those toolkit resources, so that teams can choose their own types of interventions that work best in their context. CIPD also highlighted how having shared goals enhances a sense of togetherness, and that constructive shared learning brings teams closer together so that they are more resilient when faced with challenges. So TED provides a mechanism for teams to embed these points into their team culture. So through creating a safe way for teams to assess dynamics within the team, TED can help team members share knowledge and understanding in a safe way. The TED toolkit provides those interventions in CIPD's terminology so that teams can choose the best possible next steps and set manageable goals which are informed and agreed upon by everyone within the team to create a positive culture of that shared accountability, but also that understanding that the team is able to be dynamic in a changing workplace environment. So the TED cycle encourages this repetition and for teams to revisit these factors regularly so that they can make those incremental gains even against what might be a challenging environment that they're working through or challenging situations that they find themselves in. Just to link this into the national context and the staff survey, we can see how both TED and the NHSE engagement measures look to assess and inform the work on these different factors which indicate high performance. So the staff survey measures factors such as these, so having shared team objectives, feeling able to make improvements in your work area, being involved in decision making, and the team meeting together to discuss their effectiveness. So these factors align really closely with CIPD's findings, and they emphasise the importance of that continuous improvement model and creating positive solution-focused decision-making opportunities for teams. So just coming into how this links to our work. So with this type of research in mind and what we've always intended TED to be, we've set out this year to further enhance and encourage the way a continuous improvement cycle for a team works in TED. So with the help of your feedback, for those of you who've been using it over the last 12-18 months maybe, we've been able to develop new ways for teams to learn together and make informed decisions through the follow-up TED process. So what this process aims to do is embed that engaged culture, encourage measurable feedback from teams which they can build on from previous experience and enhance that reflective practice. We've always tried to keep the TED report as accessible and as easy to interpret as possible. So what we didn't want to do is put loads of data into a TED report, but we wanted it to be at a glance easy to be able to provide evidence of the gains that might have been made, or enhanced learning where things may have gone down for a team, but create opportunities as well to celebrate shared success when teams are engaging with that reflection. So to help team leaders with that follow-up practice, we've created a guide, which is now part of the TED Toolkit. You can find this on the TED Hub, but it's also in the searchable field within TED website as well. So team leaders can find this as well as yourselves. I'll also make sure we send it out with the notes from today's session. So this guide provides some visual steps for setting up the follow-up process, along with some guidance on the benefits of embedding that improvement cycle. It also includes FAQs for team leaders who might be approaching TED for the first time, for the second time, and have questions on that. So I wanted to throw it out to you at this point. So when a team's coming up to repeating TED, what challenges can you think of? Is there anything that you think could get in the way? Maybe, is there anything you've seen with your own teams? Is there any reasons where they might be putting off doing a follow-up TED? Any thoughts in the room or experiences? Heather, would you like to go in?
Yeah, I think if the original TED results haven't actually been digested and acted upon, that'll then cause a barrier to people actually wanting to do the TED again. So if the leadership haven't taken on board the things for development, let's say, it could really impact on it going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point, that if a team doesn't feel that from the first TED they've actually got any traction with their action plan, or doesn't feel those things have been put in place, then that can be a barrier. And naturally so, if you're a team member and you're thinking, well, nothing changed since last time, this is always one of the big challenges we get with staff survey every year, that at a team level, teams often don't see some of the changes that do go on, perhaps at an organisational level. So I know you'll probably be like ourselves, that a big part of our work every year is really trying to highlight those things that go on and how that staff survey feedback is used. And it's definitely the same at a team level as well. What I would say to team leaders in this situation is consider, have you tried any of the things from your action plan? And if not, what were those barriers? And perhaps reflect that to the team around, okay, this is why perhaps it didn't work the first time. So we want to understand a bit more if anything's changed. And you might want to position it a bit like that. But I would always encourage a team to make sure, even if you're just trying to get some quick wins from your first TED, to keep that momentum. That will help you build into your second or subsequent TED. Oh, fab, we've got lots of hands. So next up, I've got Jeanette. Would you like to go in?
Yeah, I think one of the other barriers might be from whether or not the manager feels that the team members themselves have actually engaged and recognised that they need to be part of the change, rather than actually the manager's got to fix it all for us, and therefore because they haven't fixed it, I don't need to do anything. So from a manager perspective, you might then start to think, is there any point in doing anything, because I'm not going to get the team members engaged in it because of how they responded or resisted from the previous time.
Yeah, absolutely, and I see that quite a lot. Sometimes it's really important for leaders to be really clear around how TED is around the team taking ownership of what the TED report is telling you. And although the leaders absolutely have a part to play in that, it shouldn't just be about the leaders when you're creating those action plans. And definitely one of the biggest pieces of advice I give on team leader training is to make sure that the actions and the output for it aren't just all for you or for senior management. There can be a tendency sometimes when a team feels things are going wrong that they don't want to take their own ownership of it. They want to say, oh, it's senior management's responsibility, this, or they're focusing on those things which are perhaps senior management's responsibility but are outside of their control. So I would always encourage your team to think of, okay, maybe there are some things like that which we can influence and the things we can do about that, but what are the things that are absolutely inside our control that we can change about the way we work together, maybe the way we behave or way we communicate.
I just
Sam?
wanted to share an example as well. I was working with a team the other week, she was struggling, so I offered to come down and help her with a facilitation session. And it was also automatic for her to take on the actions herself. You know, it was something simple, like they were going to set up a recognition board or something. I'll do that. Yeah, next week I'll set up that. And I just paused and I was like, does anybody else want to do that? Oh yeah, I'll do it. Oh, I love doing a display. Yeah, I'll do it. And so just by getting the team leaders to pause and go, actually, you don't have to do everything, actually alleviated her from having to do that action, got them involved, and then it's that self-driven change then, is it? So if everybody is involved in doing the actions, it does drive it. And sometimes, particularly this team, they do a lot of mundane work. It was an administration team, so actually having an element of creativity and change to their work was also something that they really got involved with. And just some of the things around sort of succession planning a little bit, like giving some other people some responsibility can also be a way to stretch in a good way and provide challenge for colleagues who perhaps might be at the top of their game and they're just doing the same role all the time, giving them an opportunity to develop and even go on to TED team leader training. And actually you could have your deputy running TED. It doesn't have to be the manager as well, or they could do the second one. That could be part of the conversation too. So you're going to run the next one. What might that look like? And actually that also gives them the capacity to share the ownership as well.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, Sam, and something that often comes up in team leader coaching that I think quite often team leaders feel that they need to have all the answers and they need to have all the solutions to challenges. And sometimes that can be a barrier to engaging with TED in the first place because of that feeling that, oh, if it opens up a lot of things we need to do, I don't have the capacity personally as a team leader to deal with that. So definitely somewhere we can help support those team leaders is to try and help them through that understanding that it's about taking shared ownership with the team, and by doing that you're empowering those team members within your team to take some personal responsibility, but you're also lightening the load on your own shoulders and creating that sense of team, that team culture. When you're doing that, it can be quite liberating when that team leaders get there, but it can be quite a culture shift for them. So sometimes it can take that extra coaching support or advice to get them there. But again, another thing that highlights the importance of repeating it and trying something different and thinking, oh, maybe next time, maybe last time I did take too many things on as myself as team leader, so this time I want to make it more team focused, and ways that teams and team leaders can learn. Claire, the next. Would you like to go?
Hi. Yeah, I was just going to say exactly what Sam said. We've done that recently with some of our teams to say that, you know, get a champion in your team, you know, have someone doing it for you. And in fact, I've just done some ward managers assistants training this week because the ward managers did it. And they goes, oh, actually want our assistants to take some responsibility. So yeah, we're doing that to try and get that sort of growth and development for others. What my challenge, I don't have a challenge or a barrier because I'm not quite sure where to put it, but we've got quite a bit of restructuring going on, so we're having like new team leaders taking over teams. So it's whether they're using TED. Like I had a meeting this morning with one of the resourcing team leaders, so we've sort of reassigned the old TEDs. So she's going to do a follow-up survey, but obviously it's not going to be on her leadership, but it's going to be on her old leadership. So she's supporting her to say it's okay, because what I didn't want to do is get a brand new TED and not actually look at the last 12 months that they've done. So that could be, it's a challenge, isn't it, for new team leaders?
Yeah, definitely. It can definitely be a challenge sometimes if you feel some things perhaps shifted significantly since last time, and maybe there's that worry that, oh, our TED results might have gone down despite all of the really good work that we've done together. Yeah. And I think it's important again to try and get across to team leaders that a TED report is a snapshot of what's happening at that time. and it's not just a reflection of what's happening internally, it's a reflection of what's happening around the team as well. And just try and sort of encourage team leaders that by engaging in the process and understanding it, even if things have declined, that's still putting that step in the right direction and encouraging your team that we want to learn from what's going on and we want to keep improving. But yeah, definitely a challenge that comes up quite a lot, I think. Kim, you're next.
Yeah, I basically agree with everything that's already been said, but I think for me, we're just coming up to our first lot of re-surveys. And I think there's two things that are standing out for me. One is that we know that actually to really reap the rewards, it is a long process. You yourselves have said, you know, as an organisation, 6 years in the making, you know, in terms of actually seeing the benefits. And I think from some of the conversations, teams think it's going to be a very quick fix. We'll do the TED survey, we'll do this, it's sorted, great. And then there's something there about our teams potentially going to be frightened of not getting it right the first time. So we know it's a PDSA process, you know, we know that you need to study it and maybe make those changes, those tweaks, those alterations. People come in, come out of teams, so dynamics will change. So things may vary within the following and subsequent surveys. But I guess it's really, for me, is being clear and getting the message out. It's okay for it not to be right first time. You know, it's okay. Let's look at something different. Let's look at a different tool, a different process. Let's you know, just explore and experiment. And I think it's helpful seeing that PDSA cycle mapped over. And I think that can help. I think teams, and certainly some of the team leaders, will probably be more familiar with the PDSA process. And so I think that will really help hit home with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, Kim. And I think that really highlights that importance of really grounding the team and the team leader in their expectations the first time they come along to do a TED. And how TED can be really valuable because it can help you understand perhaps a really challenging situation for your team. But it isn't that magic wand. It's not going to solve all your problems overnight. What it will do is help you understand what are the perhaps main bits of the problem we want to focus on, or what are the things that are going right that we need to be mindful of as we perhaps do implement some sort of change or encounter uncertainty in the future. What are the core things that make us a team? What is our team purpose that we need to have that real clarity around? So that's where it can help the initial time. But definitely sometimes if a team or a team leader goes into the first TED with maybe unrealistic expectations that it is going to solve all our problems, that then means that there's a feeling when they come to do a follow-up that, oh, is it actually going to make a change because it didn't revolutionize anything the first time? So absolutely, in terms of your comms, your support you give to team leaders, reiterating that it is that continuous improvement, and the more you engage with it, the more you'll start to create those positive cultures, that confidence in the team that you're heading in the right direction. And I'll often say to team leaders that I speak to that you'll never be at that perfect stage, because no team is ever perfect. You'll always have new challenges on the horizon. You'll have different people joining the team. Maybe your team might grow, your team might take on a new responsibility. There'll always be things changing. So the way to approach it is to think, how can we make sure we're better in 6 months' time than we are now? And then in 12 months' time, how are we going to be better still? And have we got a plan to how we're going to keep making those incremental improvements that everyone's confident in and everyone feels involved in?
I think that really resonated with me, Lee, what you said and what Kim said. around incremental change. It reminded me when I did a leadership conference at the university and how we had a sports person in. I'll try and find the video and circulate it because it's a really good talk, how that like seconds and seconds off his final target of where he needs to be. Actually, every time he just chopped 1 second, just chopped 2 seconds off, that's how he made the improvements over time. And I suppose that growth mindset comment that I just put in the chat, there's something really powerful of that word yet. We're not there yet. And I think that is just like such, that my daughter's school has this big push on growth mindset for the children. And, you know, the amount, I can't do it. But I can actually almost hear my daughter sometimes say, I can't do it yet. And it's just building that confidence, isn't it? And that support that Sam said in the chat as well around, yeah, you're not there yet. So whether it is that you're going to do drop-in sessions or people can come back for a coaching conversation, it is that support, like Sam said, that will get them there eventually. But I definitely think that there's something really powerful of the word yet. We're not there yet, but we can get there.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a good example of how the language that team leaders use is so important, and the language that yourselves use when you talk to others about TED. I think that word trying to aim for perfect means that you'll always be disappointed because you're never going to quite get there. Whereas if you aim for better and you can take that heart from knowing that, yeah, we are better now than we were when we did our previous TED, or even if some of our TED results have gone down, we understand why it is. We're becoming more confident in the approach, and we're confident that if we keep trying things, we'll get even better and understand our context better. That can be really motivational if you use that right sort of language and embed that growth mindset, and definitely that's something I'd encourage with TED. Bob, just picking up on some things in the chat. Yeah, Sam, you mentioned about the right level of support is important as well. And I think what all of these things have highlighted is just how important, particularly the first time a team goes through TED, how important it is to get that tone right, get that understanding right, so there aren't unreasonable expectations, but also get that support, which might be in the form of coaching or advice on what might be the sorts of resources that teams might use, and what we're trying to embed into the toolkit. Shauna, you mentioned about making the point clear. If the team gives specific feedback by TED, then it won't be followed up with. Yeah, so I guess that's another good example of just managing those expectations when you send out a TED. And it can be hard the first time a team does this because teams don't really know what to expect. As much as you can talk to them about it, show them example reports, sometimes there's that uncertainty, but that again highlights that importance of repeating the process. And what I often find is when a team does come to do a TED for the second, third, fourth time, there's a lot more understanding in the team of, oh, this is why we're doing this is what we're using it for, and this is what I can expect from TED. Also, something we haven't touched on too much, but it's about making the team clear that TED is about providing feedback to our team. It's not about providing feedback externally, like something like staff survey, where it's providing feedback to the organisation. It's about providing feedback to each other in a safe way, but also understanding that that feedback we put in there, we're also going to take shared ownership of that. And it's all of our responsibilities to get on board with that. So definitely getting that tone right is a big part of the success with TED, but it's something which can be improved on over time as teams become more familiar with the process, have more understanding of what to expect. They can build on that as they repeat TED again and again. Okay, so I'll just pull up some of my things. I think you've come up with most of the things I put in there, but first thing that I've seen before, sometimes change and uncertainty can be a barrier to engaging with TED again. So team leaders might be deterred from repeating the TED if something significant has changed. So we had the example there of maybe a team going through a restructure or something really significant has changed. Maybe it's a new team leader in a team. So it's important when that is the case to reassure team leaders about the benefits of using TED to understand the current context, and make sure you interpret your results in the context of when your survey was sent out. So although on occasions you will get some of the scores within TED might go down from time to time, and it might be for reasons completely outside your control as a team. But make sure you communicate that when you talk to your team about TED. Acknowledge those external factors or changes within the team, and take each TED report, even if it is a repeat report, in the context of what you've done it. But still use that comparison to previous TEDs to think, okay, have the external factors changed what we're doing internally? And do we need to perhaps change something back to react to those external factors, or to get back to where we used to be, maybe? Next factor, which you see sometimes, I've touched on this already, is declining measures. Sometimes maybe other things are starting to decline within a team. So again, by encouraging team leaders, that re-engaging with TED is a positive step in itself. So by repeating the TED process, it demonstrates to the team that you want the team to be involved in the solutions to any challenges you face, and you want them to engage in that conversation around how to overcome challenges. So the TED process also helps to create that shared accountability as well. So as we mentioned, it's not about the team leader taking sole responsibility of all those things that come out of a TED. It's around sharing that with the team and sharing that burden together. One we've not mentioned on, but this is quite often one that a lot of teams say when they feel challenged about doing TED, and this is just as much the case with follow-up TEDs as it might be the first time round. Teams might have created some space for the first time they did a TED. Maybe they've been able to get some time away from the work area, but maybe things have shifted since they initially did it. And team leaders especially might be concerned that this time we can't afford the time that we spent on this last time. So I'm not sure whether we should engage with it. So here it's important to acknowledge those time constraints with the team, so the team are aware that maybe you can't give it the same amount of time as you did the first time, but still emphasize the importance of the feedback from the team. So making it clear to the team that maybe we can't go into the same depth, but this time we're going to choose our top 2 things to work on, and we're going to recognize our top areas for improvement. And we plan to revisit TED at some point in the future where we hope to give it that more perhaps in-depth conversation. So again, it shows how having that clear plan and communicating it well to the team helps to create that sense of TED is part and parcel of what we do. This absolutely will influence the key things which are affecting us, and we plan to revisit this regularly so we can react to things that are going on and changes we face. Final one I've got on here, sometimes there might be a barrier to understanding the value of repeating TED. And I think this particularly might be the case for teams who maybe did have unrealistic expectations the first time, or maybe they've not seen any massive changes since the first time they did it. Maybe the plans they put into action didn't come out as they'd hoped, or they've not been able to get the time to do the things that they planned. So if this is the case, I would try to get across to team leaders the value of that continuous improvement process. Use your second or follow-up TED to be able to reflect on, why didn't things work from last time? Were we perhaps too overambitious with it? Do we need to scale back some of our plans this time? Or has there been some significant change that's happened that's meant different things are a priority now? And that can really help to raise that awareness of the value of, let's repeat this because our results might be different now, or even if our results aren't very different from last time, what have we learned from that process? What have we learned about how we perhaps didn't allow ourselves enough time, or we were too ambitious with the changes we tried to implement? So it helps teams grow together, I guess, is what it's trying to do. Okay. Sam, would you like to go in before I move on?
Yeah, sorry, can I just ask something really quickly? It's perhaps not so much of a barrier of the second TED, but just something that we've come across where managers have been a bit reluctant or hesitant about sharing their results when there's things in the open or free text comments where perhaps they feel it identifies a member of the team, or there's some feedback about the leadership or something like that. And I just wondered if anybody else had come across it and any ways in which you've dealt with it.
Okay.
Has anyone else had this across the collaborative? All right, just checking in. What about you, Lee?
Yeah, so I would say, yeah, I have seen this before, and you will get this happen sometimes with teams. And what I would say, this is again highlights the importance of repeating that process so that teams are aware of, oh, this is how our results look and this is how it comes through. But definitely, if you get that sort of situation, my advice to team leaders is if you feel there's anything in there that could either significantly derail your conversation or could identify an individual, rather than sharing back those pages with the full verbatim of everything that's in the free text comments, just summarize the key reasons to be proud and the key points for improvement, and be clear with the team on why you're not sharing the full text, because you didn't want to identify anyone, so it is still that safe way of viewing it. But make sure you summarize what's in those comments so that the team members do understand that feedback's been read and it's been interpreted and brought back. One of the reasons why when we created the report we wanted those free text comments to sit on a separate page is because you will get that from time to time. But in my experiences, the more a team's gone through TED, the more they'll understand this is how our data is used, and the emphasis should really be on the data rather than the comments. The comments are there to perhaps highlight what underpins the data and prompt that conversation. Does that help, Sam?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, fab. But yeah, I have seen that, and for the rest of you in the room, if you haven't seen that, it will come up from time to time. But what I would say is that the worst thing a team leader could do in that situation is not share back TED at all, because that will undermine that confidence. So it's so important to acknowledge it, but maybe just focus your session on the data pages that are in there. Claire, would you like to go in?
Yeah, it's just that's what I do with my training, is just tell them to keep the comments back for back pocket, like summarize for pride, the pride piece for celebrating, and then improvements. And I have actually seen quite a damned report on a leader. But what we also do in the training is say you might get stats that you don't, or results that might be a bit upsetting, because you might feel that's not you operating, but it is a perception, and it's about how you might want to turn that round. And we have sort of suggested, like, sort of using coaching questions like, you know, how could I improve the way I lead, etc. But again, we definitely offer support if they get sort of questions that are coming up as red. I mean, I had a couple of ambers, but that's not been a big issue. It's been, haven't had any red yet, but that's how we position it. So just that they're not alone with it, because with any sort, it's like a 180, isn't it? You're always going to get people thinking, you know, I always say back to my own example of getting 360 was one comment throws you out the window. There's maybe 10 people have thought you're positive, but there's one person that can sort of derail you. So yeah, we do offer that extra coaching support for leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point there, Claire. And I think, again, that can be one of the biggest barriers for a team leader of engaging in TED, whether it's the first time or a subsequent time, is if the feeling is that, oh, some of those comments might be quite personal or negative about myself, or the leadership scores might be lower. And that's where our coaching support can really help. And where possible, where a team leader can feel comfortable, I always encourage them to explore that with the team, because it's more around that perception. It's not to say that they are like a comment may suggest. It's to say that here's one perception. How can I improve? And really try and be open to the team that there's that willingness to improve, but also remind the team that it's not just about the team leader. Every member of the team has a role in making leadership work in the way that works best for that team. But great example, thank you.
Just wondering, Lee, I know that you'll
Certainly.
be keen to move on to the next bit of the slides, but I just wondered if there is also an opportunity to talk in different spaces, such as in a one-to-one or in smaller groups. If it doesn't feel comfortable to talk through that feedback openly in the team meeting, perhaps it could be something that could be explored, maybe just in one-to-ones first, perhaps, or finding different ways to address it openly, but perhaps not in a big forum.
Absolutely, and that's a great point. So something a team leader might say during their TED session is that to help get to the bottom of this, I intend to listen to you in our one-to-ones and look at ways that I can improve. Maybe a team leader might commit to one of our action plans is, as a leader, I'm going to do a leadership 360 to learn more around what my role is, and I'd encourage you all to contribute to that because I want to learn and I want to improve how we go. And that's a good way of a leader showing that they are taking personal responsibility for those different perceptions. But then again, as I said earlier on, make sure that that isn't the only action that comes out of TED. That's one of a number of actions which also encompasses everyone else that's within the team. Fab. Okay, I'm going to get moving along now because I've still a few slides to go through before we wrap up. So to measure progress and inform those rich discussions through follow-up TEDs, we've included additional features in your follow-up team report. So at the top of a repeat TED, you'll notice you get the high-level measure comparison. So you'll be able to see results from the previous TED to see how far a team has come, what's improved, what's maybe declined in there. You also get the averages for each question that are comparable through the additional column in there. You can see on the one on the screen, if this was me as a team leader, I'd be thinking, oh, wow, we got reds and ambers last time, we've all greens this time. So look how far we've come. And again, as I said before, we've tried to put this together in a way which is at a glance easy to pick out. What are those big improvements? What are key successes that you want to celebrate as a team, but also to add richness to that discussion around, okay, what's changed, what maybe hasn't moved since last time as well. What I'd also encourage team leaders to do, and best practice, is review your previous action plan with the team. So reflect on what things have worked, what maybe didn't work, and how the team has developed over that time together. And what you might want to do is look at the key themes that you've worked on, look at those results in the TED report, see what's improved, and ask those sorts of coaching questions when you come back to your team. Next up, from a practitioner's perspective, so for us, those of you with trust level accounts and in looking at the TED data for your organisation, you might want to use that data to measure the numbers of repeat TEDs being completed. Our downloadable spreadsheets provide you with an opportunity to filter out any that are repeat TEDs to see if perhaps those scores are higher in average than the first time teams have done TED. That's definitely what we see at Lancs Teaching, but it is early days yet because it's something we've only recently built in there. So what we'd encourage you to do is try and encourage those teams who've perhaps done TED maybe over 6 months ago to revisit the process, and that will help your organisational learning around TED as well. You might also want to look at organisation or division averages, and again, because of our downloadable spreadsheets, you can cut this data in the ways that you want, filtering out repeats versus initial TEDs, and help that in your own evaluation of how TEDs help him. So to support this, we have a case study example. I don't know whether Sam wants to come in on this. I know you've put this together, but we can share an example. I know Claire's been very close to this from East Kent. Do you want to just summarise what's in this document for us, Sam?
Yeah, well, it was Claire's case study in the first place, and then I just kind of branded it up and added some graphs in for her just to kind of enhance the visually. So we will share it as follow-up. It's really well done. The way that Claire's done it, it's really easy, I think, for team leaders. It's more sort of story, very conversational. You know, how did you use TED? What were your outcomes? What actions did your team implement? Trying to capture also that anecdotal feedback, because sometimes you can't always see the actual feedback that teams feel in the data, but actually capturing what the team's comments are, how the team members feel, I think is really helpful too. And just think that I've done it really well, so I just wanted to put the brand on there a little bit. So I'll share it around. It could be a really good starting point for everybody as well, if you want to start using these in your trust as a starting point. And then when I did the data, I did it recently for a finance team. If you do use your export, you can then sort of, like we talked about, filter out the two that you're working on. So this team hadn't done a repeat TED, which was a bit made me grumpy because I couldn't directly compare. But a bit of a workaround was I pulled out their data, and then I just made a quick graph. And I could see and show them in the session that they had increased on most of them. I think there was just this one that dropped down. So if you do need to make any visuals for your case studies, using the data sheet, pulling it into Excel, and then just maybe pulling a graph together. I could even do a quick video if you wanted me to show you how to do that if you're not sure. What we can do on the super user export, unfortunately, it's not worked on yours yet, but we've got our team working on it now. But you can then pull out the questions and the results as well, which I think is really useful. So I just did this for the team that I was working with so that they could see, and then they could also sort as well. So, you know, if I wanted to see what their lowest versus their highest was last time, and then sort of which one it was now. So I would just play with this as I was talking through with the team leader. And then I also looked at, well, you know, where have they dipped and where have they increased? So that's another little tool that I could share with you on the email after. So if your team doesn't do a repeat TED, this is just a bit of a workaround for you.
That's fab. Thanks, Sam. Let's come back to our slides. Yeah, so we'll share those examples, but what I guess we'd like you to think about is how can you capture those stories? We're always talking about case studies, but this is another great example of how a team might want to evaluate what they've done, capture those, perhaps quotes from team leaders, team members, think about what that journey's been like. So 3 things that we'd like you to take away from the session and things to consider. First, share the PDF guide to doing follow-up TEDs. Let your teams know about it, those teams who've perhaps already done TED who might be considering a follow-up. Hopefully that will give them that perception of why it's important, how they can benefit from repeating the process. And we've got that evaluation template and that example, that great example from East Kent that you can have a look at as well. Something else you might consider, maybe run some follow-up events. So something we're doing at Lancs Teaching, we run coffee catch-ups for yourselves, but we're also implementing some of those internally over the next few months, and really trying to grow that community of TED leaders and create that shared ownership, and share some of those stories of how teams have repeated the TED process. So that community can be really valuable when you build that in your organization. And then final point is to consider where you might target communications. So consider what's your data telling you, maybe reference whether a repeat TED opportunities, you might want to target communications at team leaders who've already been through the process, and share some of those documents and case study examples that we've got. Maybe think around who's been 6 months since they last did it, and we'll put some targeted comms into them. Okay, so we're just coming up to the end, but just in summary, just want to emphasize that importance of repetition, because that's what helps culture change and drives culture change. Through TED, you can get that team data evidence to help encourage and realign what a team is doing at a team level, but then at an organization level, it can help you inform the big picture and see what that direction of travel is that you're on. So finally, just to signpost you to our next events, we are at quarterly deep dive time of year. So next month we won't have a lunch and learn. We'll have our quarterly deep dive on the 22nd of August. We've also got our coffee catch-ups, which we will still be running monthly. And the next lunch and learn will be in September. We haven't come up with a topic yet. I think it might be around staff survey, because we're, if I dare say that at this time, we are coming up to that time of year. But if any of you do have any topics you'd like us to cover, please let us know and we can build that into our delivery schedule.